An extremely, extremely sad story. She didn't need to die because, first of all, the guy should have been in jail. I'm not going to start on all the politics that are involved with.
Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 32, and this one is self-defense tips for young women. Now, before we get to the main topic, a quick few things. First one is the habitual shout-out that I always do in the beginning of episodes for the patrons that support my work. And today I'm going to give my shout-out to Bill Mariah. Bill's been one of my supporters for almost a year now, I think. And he's been helping me actually make all the podcast episodes and everything else that I do for you guys. So a huge shout out to Bill. Thank you for your support. Thank you for helping me and letting me do the stuff that I like to do, obviously, which is share as much information as possible with everybody. So it's thanks to my patrons like Bill, who make this all possible. So huge thanks to you, Bill. You're the man. And if you want to join Bill and everybody else, go to patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name. Put a link in the show notes, obviously, and see all the stuff we've got there. It's quite a lot. It's getting to be quite a lot. So again, that is the shout out. Then the next thing, quick announcement. A few days ago, I recorded the next episode, and this is not a crossover with Ian Abernethy. Now, if you guys remember, about 6-7 months ago, I did the first crossover podcast with Ian, where it was you guys asking questions and Ian and I taking those on. And this time we did a little bit different. What we did is try to come up with a bunch of tips for practitioners of martial arts and self-defense systems, and also common mistakes. And I tried to go a little bit away from the stuff that I've already covered in the past. As you guys know, I've done a specific episode on that topic, covering the 3 biggest mistakes I see students make. And again, I'll link to that in the show notes. But the goal was to cover a little bit different stuff, not just the classical things that you would then see. But the point is that we had a blast, and it was really fun to do that episodes. If all goes well, then it should come out next week. So if all goes well, might be a little bit later, but it looks like it's going to go well. And at some time in next week, I will release this podcast episode together with Ian, doing that at the same time, pretty much. So you have that to look forward to. And we already have some plans for some other stuff, which I'm not going to say. You're going to just have to listen to the episode and find out. So that's it for the announcements. And then we can get to the main topic of this episode, and that's the self-defense tips for young women. Now, I am going to give you a little bit of an explanation of where this comes from, but also try to give some caveats and basically try to figure out a way in which I can, how should I put it, give some context so that listeners, especially young women, who may not have a lot of experience with violence, that they can then understand a little bit better what I am talking about and where I'm coming from. And I've noticed that this is more necessary now than it used to be in the past. So that is the main thing that I'm going to do now. So first off, why this episode? Well, as some of you know, I've written a blog post many years ago, Self-Defense Tips for Men. And it was, I think it's pretty much one of my highest, or at least in the top 3 blog posts that still today, that just keeps on getting people discovering it, and they just keep coming back to it. So it's been quite popular, and a lot of people told me that they liked it. And I got repeated requests for doing something similar for young women. So that was the first thing. Now, the second trigger point for this episode is actually an extremely sad story. Here in Belgium, about a month ago, a young woman, 23 years old, Julie van Espen, she took her bicycle to go meet some friends, and she was attacked by a guy who had 2 previous convictions for rape, and he tried to sexually abuse her. She fought back, but he killed her. And then he threw her body in a canal, and she was later discovered. The guy got arrested. An extremely sad story. She didn't need to die, because first of all, the guy should have been in jail. I'm not going to start on all the politics that are involved with how bad our justice system is run over here in Belgium, but he should have been in jail, and this could have been prevented. And she had her full life in front of her, and it was taken away in a horrible manner. So that is the second reason why I'm doing this episode, and is directly tied into the third reason, and that is very soon after this happened, I was contacted to teach a self-defense class to a group of young women, and we're setting this up and trying to figure out how we're going to do the logistics of that. But this is not uncommon. I've had this happen many times before, when there's an extreme case of rape, abuse, or murder, or something along those lines, in particular for young women. Then I get contacted, and I try to help if I can. It's not always possible, but that's something that I try to do. Why? And then we come to another reason for this episode, is that I've worked with abused and raped women a lot over the years. It's always extremely, how should I put it? It's extremely rewarding if you can help somebody in the process of recovering from that trauma, and also at the same time give them more options should they be in a similar situation. Now, I also have an 18-year-old daughter, so I care about this on a personal level. I've been trying to teach her many things about safety and self-defense over the years. And one of the things I will be doing, obviously, is when this episode goes live, that I'm going to share it with her and say, hey, listen to your dad and listen to him whine and preach one more time about this topic. So hopefully that she can use that as well. Now, those are the reasons why I am doing this episode. And the main thing I want to point out to the young women in the audience now listening to this is the following. I'm going to talk about a pretty harsh subject. I'm not going to pull punches. I am going to tell you the truth as I know it. Now, that doesn't mean that I am the only source of information you should listen to, but I just will give you this information, and I hope you can then think about it and then do as you see fit with it. I hope you find it useful. If not, go look for other information. The main thing that I want to point out about this information is that just because it ruffles your feathers, maybe, just because it goes against some of the things you might have heard already, don't immediately discard it. There's a reason why it's going to ruffle your feathers. And I speak from bitter experience, having worked with so many abused and raped women, that a lot of the things you hear nowadays are either not practical, not realistic, or downright evil when it comes to what women are told about men and rape. So why am I saying this? Well, this is the first caveat that I'm going to give about this episode, and it's the following. But a few months ago, I think about 4 or 5 months ago, there was this thing on my Facebook page. I can't remember what started it, but it ended up with several people, of which several women, going on about the post that I made, and basically their point was, teach men not to rape. If you think that teach men not to rape is the only answer to rape and sexual abuse, stop listening to this podcast episode right now, because it's not for you. If you think that is the only answer, the only solution, then nothing that I will say will get through, and it's not worth your time to continue. So stop right here. If you can imagine that there might be other options, that it might be actually a more complex topic to tackle, and a more difficult problem to handle than with just one single step, then maybe you might find what I have to say next interesting. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is that I've seen this mindset of teach men not to rape in increasingly in the last few years. And I think it's doing an incredible, horrible disservice to women, because it's a flawed way of reasoning on many levels. First level, become dispassionate and look at rape not as an emotional topic, but just as one of many of the crimes that exist on our planet. There are other crimes. Stealing. You're not allowed to steal. Okay. Do we say to people, teach people not to steal? We don't. Most people know that it's not okay to steal. It's in pretty much every law book that there is in Western countries. You will find laws against stealing, just like there are laws against raping. How is it working when you say, don't steal? It's not working. You could say about murder and homicide, you could say, teach people not to kill. Well, in the vast majority of the populations in Western countries, everybody pretty much knows that you shouldn't kill. It's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. It's still happening though. So do you see my point? It's that if you apply that logic of teach men not to rape to other crimes, it falls apart. It completely falls apart. And then we get to a different aspect of it, which is why it also is a flawed way of reasoning, is look up the term negligence. And it is actually a term that is often used in certain kinds of lawsuits. And if you look up your insurance policy, for instance, for your car, you're very likely to find negligence clauses. And what does that mean? Well, when you park your car somewhere, do you lock it or not? If you don't lock it, depending on what kind of policy you have, you're actually liable for whatever happens next, because you were negligent with your property. So do you lock your car when you go away or not? I'm guessing yes. Do you lock the door of your house when you leave? Or do you leave it wide open? I'm guessing you don't. I'm guessing you lock it when you leave. That is what I mean with negligence. If you wouldn't do that, you'd be negligent. And you would agree with me, very likely, that not doing those things, not locking your car or the door of your house, doesn't make much sense, because you know there is a danger of somebody stealing your car or stealing your stuff the stuff in your house if you give that opportunity. So then why not apply the same thing to your own body and mind? Why not do something to help keep you safe of one of the most horrible traumas that a woman can experience in her life? One of the reasons why I think we see this kind of thinking of teach men not to rape come up is that people tend to mistake blame and responsibility. When you say to a woman, like, you might want to do a self-defense class or learn how to defend yourself, that doesn't mean that she's to blame if she still gets raped. What it means is that we all, as adults, are responsible for our own lives. Nobody else is. Nobody else can take action in your stead. You have to do things yourself. That's one of the things it means to be an adult. So if you refuse to take responsibility for your own life, your own safety, well, nobody can do it in your stead. And if you say, well, the government should do more to teach men not to rape, okay, same deal. The government should do more to stop people from stealing, to stop them from murdering, to stop them doing all the other crimes that happen pretty much every day. How's that working out? It's not working out. That's just not how reality works. So this whole mindset of solely focusing on teaching men not to rape is, in my opinion, besides the point. And it ends up with having a lot of women not taking the opportunity to learn how to defend themselves, to learn to spot danger and avoid it and so on, and simply assume that, well, it's not my problem. And then they get raped. And it's one of the most horrible crimes that you can put a woman through, to having to live with that for the rest of your life. So why would you not do your utmost to avoid that kind of thing? It's beyond me. I think it has to do with ideology and many other things that we have going on nowadays in our societies. but it's a huge disservice to women. And I think it's the people who knowingly do that are, in my opinion, it's downright evil, because you're basically condemning somebody to enter situations that they shouldn't enter into, and then they have to suffer the trauma and the consequences of that. But the people espousing that kind of mindset, they stay clear. They don't have to suffer the consequences. So I think it's horrible. But I know this is one of the positions that is extremely popular nowadays, which is why I'm giving this whole explanation. It doesn't make sense to me. No, I've been a man for 47 years. I have a son. I teach him how to act around women and so on. I don't know of any man ever who taught his children, his young men, his sons, that it's okay to rape. I don't know anybody who teaches that. Quite on the contrary, pretty much every Western country in the world has a rape on the books as a crime. Nobody's condoning it. Nobody that I know of and that I've ever seen is proudly declaring all over the internet and on Facebook and to all the world that he's very proud that he raped somebody. I don't see that happening. Maybe some lunatic does, but the 99.999% of all the men say that it's wrong. So what gives? Anyway, I've gone long enough about this kind of thing, but I wanted to give this caveat because I've experienced it several times in the last few years, getting basically told like teaching women self-defense is wrong. That makes you guilty of blaming the victim. I was like, okay, but I'll explain that story in a bit. Anyway, feel free to disagree with my position on this. But my point is that if you are so blinded by your ideology that you refuse to protect yourself, then really this podcast isn't for you. I wish you the best, really. I want you to be safer and in a world where you don't have any danger. But until that world comes to pass, I think that proactively working on your own safety, especially as a young woman, is one of the most sensible things you can do. And if I could snap my fingers and make it happen that nobody ever gets raped again, I would do it in a heartbeat. But nobody has that power. And even if you believe in that utopian world, well, how long is that going to take until you get there? Is it about a few months, a few years, a few decades? I think it's realistic to say that even if every government on earth would do its utmost to stop rape from happening, that it would still take a while before they achieve that goal. In the meantime, the women that are at risk and the women that get raped, what do we do with them? We ignore that? We see them just as casualties of war? No, I disagree with that. I want to give all the women around the world the opportunity to defend themselves. If I could make that happen, I'd do it right away. So this is a long caveat, but I wanted to give it because I know that even despite this caveat, people are still going to go nuts over what I'm going to say in my recommendations and tips. So anyway, moving on, what I will explain doesn't guarantee your safety 100%. That's the main thing that is difficult to understand if you're not experienced with violence. There's no guarantees. Nobody can give you a guarantee. There's no secret move. There's no works every time move. It doesn't exist. The only thing you can do is improve your odds of keeping yourself safe, getting away, and avoiding getting raped or being the victim of sexual abuse. That's it. There's no guarantees. The only thing you can do is act. This is pretty much true in everything in life. There's no guarantees in anything. There's no guarantees that wearing your seatbelt and driving carefully will keep you safe forever. Some idiot can still run through a red light and kill you instantly in a car crash. It can happen. That doesn't mean that you give up wearing your seatbelt and that you just close your eyes and drive into traffic and hope everything's fine. No, you still do the best you can. You're not negligent. You try to keep yourself safe. Same thing here. There's no guarantees, but it doesn't mean you can't do anything to improve the odds of being safe. And that is what I'm going to try to do in the following tips. So that's the first thing. I needed to get all this out of the way, and then we're going to get to tip number 1. And that is, Julie's case is the exception. It's not the rule. A stranger just coming out of the dark, so to speak, and grabbing you and raping you, that's actually a relatively small percentage of the attackers. It's one of the myths that keeps on being promoted and divulged by a lot of people, but it's actually a relatively small percentage. Now, most likely, and I know this sounds strange, you will know your attacker. In the majority of cases, it's a family member, it's somebody in your group of friends, it's an acquaintance, etc. To give you an example, a significant portion of rapes happen in a room right next to the room where a bunch of people are getting together in some sort of social gathering. For whatever reason, the man and the woman get isolated in that room, or the rapist gets her in that room, and then he does his evil deed to her. So I know this is uncomfortable information to accept as a young woman, but act accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean you have to dismiss attacks by strangers. That's not what it means. It means that is not necessarily the primary danger. It isn't. So if, for instance, somebody you know gives you the creeps, well, pay attention to that. Don't ignore it. If in your circle of friends or a family member looks at you in a way that you really think is wrong, okay, don't ignore it. Don't pretend it's not going on. Maybe he has a squint in his eye, who knows? It doesn't have to be nefarious, but at the very least, don't ignore something when it feels off. And don't just dismiss it because, well, I know this guy, or he's been a friend for years, so it's going to be fine. That's the wrong mindset. So that's tip number 1. Second tip, you might or might not enjoy this one, but work out. Go to sports. Doesn't matter what it is, but work out. And there are several reasons for that. First reason, it's going to make you stronger, get you in better shape, so you can run and get away from a guy, or if need be, you can fight better if you're in shape. To put it bluntly, stronger people are harder to rape and kill. Now, that doesn't mean you have to start lifting weights and become a power lifter or bodybuilder. What I mean is just improve your level of physical fitness over what it is right now, and then try to maintain it. And to put your mind at ease, I've been a personal trainer for almost 30 years now. You're not going to become a bodybuilder. You won't look like these women who are insanely muscular and no longer look feminine. You just don't have the testosterone for that. That's just not how it goes. What you need to do to become that huge is basically use a bunch of steroids and other fancy supplements, so to speak. And supplements is used in the ironic sense here. So don't worry about that. What usually happens when women start lifting weights, and it doesn't have to be heavy weights, but is that they start getting actually in quite good shape, and that they become a lot more toned in their bodies, and many women actually say that they start to look better and clothes fit better and so on. But at the very least, the point is you're going to get stronger, and stronger people can defend themselves better. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that it's going to change the way you move. And why is this important? Well, you've probably heard this one before, and it is that you have to walk with confidence when you're down in the street so that everybody knows that you're not a victim. Okay, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean, walk with confidence? And a bunch of people have their own opinions on that I don't necessarily agree with. Here's the point. If you're faking it, then this is something that the predators that are out there can actually spot. So wouldn't it be better if you actually build real confidence? Okay, how do you do that? Well, one way to build confidence is to overcome obstacles. Exercising, and any particular difficult and fatiguing exercise, that forces you to overcome your own limitations. It forces you to become mentally tough and keep going when you want to give up because things are getting rough and difficult, and you're getting tired. Now, if you do that enough, it's going to become a part of who you are, of your own personality. And at the same time, it's going to change how you move. And that is the key point that I want to mention here. It's going to change how you move. Now, what does that mean? Well, for instance, look at somebody who did ballet for a long time when they were a child or up into their early teens. Very often you can see, even years after, sometimes even decades after, that they still have this perfectly upright posture and this more graceful way of just simply walking around and using their bodies. The same thing applies to martial arts. For instance, I can very often spot a wrestler because of the way they move. They tend to have, not all of them, but typically wrestlers tend to have a more heavier step and tend to be a little bit different in the way that they move from other people. So you can spot that. For a predator, that's a dangerous signal, obviously. So the conclusion is that the signals that you send out subconsciously, on a physical level, are that you're not a weak prey. Why is this so important? Well, there was a study done many years ago with prisoners, and they showed them just a video of people walking down the street, if I'm not mistaken, and then did a questionnaire afterwards and asked those guys, well, okay, who would you pick for a victim, for an easy victim? Who would you pick first? Why not? And so on. It's a quite detailed questionnaire. I'm just going to pick out two things to explain this to you. And the first one is that they looked for coordinated movement. If they saw uncoordinated movement, it typically showed a victim profile for them. If they saw coordinated movement, it felt to them a lot more that this person probably knows how to defend themselves. They look more comfortable in their own body. So that was one of the signals they looked for. Well, if you work out, you're much more likely to become more coordinated. Just like I said, somebody, a young woman who does ballet, who did that for a few years, tends to move differently than one who didn't. Same thing with gymnastics, could be something else. It doesn't really matter what you do. It's the fact that you exercise that teaches your body to move differently. Another thing that they looked for was stride length. So how are you walking? Now, what they basically didn't want is somebody with a medium gait, with a medium stride length. If the stride length was very small, it triggered them more into action. And if it was overly big, if it was exaggerated, that was also a signal that they thought that would be an easier victim. But a medium stride length, that is something that they rather wanted to avoid. Medium stride length is somebody who walks naturally. Somebody who's not making an effort to look more impressive, but they're also not hiding. They're comfortable with their walk. It all comes back to training, getting in shape, and developing a lot of things that then become automatic in the way that you use your body, even in simple things like just, reaching down and picking something off the ground. Somebody who's been doing squats and deadlifts for years, they're going to do that differently from somebody who's never done that in their life. And these kind of things are subconscious signals that you send out to the predators, and that in many cases, it's going to take you off their victim list. So train regularly. And if it's self-defense oriented or martial arts class, it's even better, but really anything will do. So that was tip number 2. Number 3, be careful with the signals that you send. Now, this is going to be controversial again. The reason why I am giving you all of these tips in different categories, so to speak, and particularly this one, is there are different kinds of situations in which women get raped. There's different guys who end up raping women. They're not all psychopaths, like the guy who killed Julie Van Espen, who clearly is deranged, whose own father said to the police, like, my son will kill somebody eventually. You have to do something about it. Those are the extreme cases, but not every rapist is at that point, at that level. There's categories of guys who are not necessarily psychopathic killers, but they're just assholes. And you can often avoid the trouble they give by not triggering them. Again, doesn't mean that it's your fault if they get triggered, but it is your responsibility to handle whatever comes next. So maybe you can avoid it altogether. But that means that you need to know what triggers them. And all that boils down to understanding, well, basically, how do you flirt with guys? How do you try to seduce them, so to speak? And then you do the opposite. Give you a few examples. So first one, clothes. Again, this is going to be really, really controversial. Now, you should be able to walk into a bar and that bar's filled with bad guys and you're wearing nothing but a tiny string bikini. You should be able to do that and get out of there unharmed. But is that real? Do you really think that's realistic? I don't think so. So let's get should out of the way. Should is one word that you need to get out of your vocabulary when it comes to self-defense. I'll give you an example. A while ago, I was talking to this young woman, and for whatever reason, the topic of self-defense came up, and I said that is one of the things that I do professionally. She got all upset about that and said, she shouldn't have to learn to defend herself. And actually, self-defense for women, that's victim blaming, and that's making everything worse. And we talked a little bit more about that and said, look, here's how I explain it to people. Yes, you're right. You shouldn't have to defend yourself. No man has the right to sexually abuse or rape you. They're not allowed to do that. That's a crime. You shouldn't have to defend yourself against that. You shouldn't have to put up with that ever. I agree. We're in full agreement here. But that's not the reality we live in. So the analogy is this. In most countries, and especially here in Belgium, I know that for sure, is that if you want to cross the road and you're at the zebra crossing, the mere fact that you stand in front of it and face the street demonstrates your intent to cross. At that point, every single car needs to stop and let you pass. That is the law over here. So they need to stop, and then you start walking across the zebra crossing, get to the other side of the road, and you're fine. That's how it should go. That's the law. Okay, let's imagine you're at a zebra crossing, and you look left, and you see that there's this guy racing in his car going way too fast. And he's never going to be able to stop if you cross the street right then and there. What do? You should be able to cross the road then. He's wrong. He's breaking the law. He's infringing upon your rights. Do you cross the street, or do you wait until that lunatic passes you by? And then you have a choice. You can say that I want to keep on living, and I'll let that guy get away with infringing upon my rights. Or I'm going to cross the street because I'm right, damn it, and I shouldn't have to stop because that criminal is just thinking about his own thing, his own needs and his own wants, and he's not going to get away with it. I'm going to cross, and then you die. So what do? The vast majority of the women will say, well, I'll let the car pass, and he's an asshole, and I agree with you, he's an asshole, but that's not the point. The point is that just because you're in the right, legally speaking, morally speaking, that doesn't mean that it's the smartest solution always to try to exercise that right. There are many cases when it comes to violence where it's the smarter course to actually avoid it. And it doesn't feel good. And it's actually quite difficult sometimes because it goes against the grain. It's very difficult for human beings sometimes to do this kind of stuff. However, if the option is doing that or dying, which one do you prefer? If the option is doing that or getting raped, which one do you prefer? So all that said, I would say when it comes to clothes, dress appropriately for where you're going, whatever that means. And there's several reasons for that. If you stand out, you're going to draw attention. Now, and this works two ways. If you're at this party and it's a beach party and you're supposed to come in bikini, and you're the girl wearing this big fur winter coat and keep it tightly wrapped around you and you don't want to show anything, well, you're going to draw attention. And you're likely to draw attention of a bunch of assholes and idiots and drunk frat boys and so on. So that's one way in which you can stand out. On the other hand, if everybody's more or less dressed the same way, from a little bit revealing to not all that much, and you're the girl wearing next to nothing, you're going to draw attention. Now, if that's your choice, I would say make it consciously. It's up to you how much cleavage you want to show. It's none of my business. But don't pretend that it doesn't have any consequences. If you want to dress sexy, it's fine. Expect to get attention though. And that's a good thing, because that means that maybe the cute guys, the guys that you think are hot, they're going to come your way. But it also is likely to bring out the creeps. And that is my point. It's not either or. It's likely to bring out both. And if you've gone out clubbing, you know what I'm talking about. So my main point is that be aware of the signals that you're sending out. That is the key point. I'm not here to lecture and tell you you can or cannot wear certain things. I'm only saying that if you wear certain things, understand that it comes with baggage, that it comes with consequences, sometimes that you don't want. And if you're aware of this potential, then you can do something about it. That's the whole point. Wear whatever you want, but don't pretend that it doesn't send a certain signal to, or that it's interpreted by men in a certain way. And they're still assholes for interpreting that in the wrong way, but it doesn't matter. The moment that they start harassing you, that's when those consequences start matter. So that's one. Second one, eye contact. Don't look at a guy too long, or he's going to see it as an invitation. And this seems silly, but it's true, because eye contact is one of the primary ways in which we connect with strangers. And there's all sorts of rules with that. For instance, if you're in an elevator, what do most people do? Well, you stand looking straight ahead at the door, and you're standing right next to somebody, and you do not make eye contact. If you do make eye contact, it's only just a fraction of a second, and then you both look away. Now, if somebody keeps looking at you after you have this glance of an eye contact, you're going to start feeling extremely uncomfortable. And you're going to start thinking, oh, what the hell is wrong with this guy? That's what I mean with eye contact having certain consequences in a given context. Just be aware of that. Just be aware that eye contact is a signal, just like we have a bunch of nonverbal signals that everybody uses, men, women alike. But be aware of it. And then the final one, and this one is actually, again, sometimes difficult to explain this message, but that's touching. Now, men in general, and young men in particular, they take touching as a cue that you're into them. And I'm going to explain this one by a reverse example. So, I'm sure that if you have a boyfriend and he's got a big group of friends, that there's one guy you really can't stand, that is a creep, you don't like him at all, and you just wish he wouldn't be in the circle of friends of your boyfriend. Right. So imagine that you're at your boyfriend's house, there's a big party, everybody's there, and it's casual, it's relaxed, it's fine. Okay. If that guy then suddenly comes up to you and he starts leaning against you a little bit, or he puts his hand on your shoulder or around your waist, not in a sexual manner, but just making physical contact, what do? You freeze, you cringe, you pull away when he does, you try to get him off you, and so on. I think those are realistic responses, because you don't want him to touch you, because you don't like the guy at all. Now look at the same thing if it's a guy you actually really like, you think he's hot, and you want to know him better. If he touches you in the same way that creep just did, what do? You pull away? No. Allowing touch is signaling that you're at the very least comfortable with a person. Doesn't mean you're into them, but at the very least, you're comfortable enough to let him touch you. And you know this already. If some random guy on the street touches you, what do? You get him off you. You start yelling and screaming if need be. You're like, get the hell away from me. What are you doing? Keep your hands off. Well, touch is one of the ways in which we test boundaries. It's also in one of the ways that assholes test boundaries, to see if they can get away with it, to see if you have what it takes to say no to them. And if you don't have that, then they know that maybe if they push a little bit more, they can get you to do other things. And it works in two directions. You touching a guy is also a signal. Now, maybe you didn't mean anything by it, but that's not necessarily how guys see it. And I know this is stupid, but I know this must sound stupid to you, but that's how a lot of guys see it. And in isolation, if it's just this harmless touch, that's not necessarily an issue. But now let's add in a bunch of other factors. Alcohol, maybe drugs. You end up isolated from the group that you're with. You end up alone in a room with a guy, and so on. Those factors, when they get involved and then there's touch, that can actually trigger a chain reaction of events that ends in sexual assault or worse. Now again, it is not your fault if he attacks you. But if you know that certain behavior and certain factors can trigger an attack, then why would you consciously ignore that danger? At the very least, I would say be aware of his reactions and stay alert. But be mindful of the signals that you send out. Now, my point is not that you can't do these things. That is not what I'm saying. The point is that I would suggest being selective who you do those things with. I'll give you a quick story from a few years ago. I was stuck in traffic, and in front of me was a city bus. It was quite empty, but in the back of the bus, there were two girls, I would say 13, 14 years old. And I was stuck behind the bus, so I look straight ahead, and they turn around and they look at me. They make eye contact. And one of the girls starts to do this combination of doing lewd gestures and giving sort of a striptease. I didn't see anything really, but she was kind of mimicking that she was going to take her top off, pushing her tiny little bosom against the glass of the window and so on, and sticking her tongue out and a bunch of stuff that was wildly suggestive. And at first I started laughing. And then I thought, like, did you really have an idea what you're doing here? And I could tell that her girlfriend sitting next to her was getting extremely uncomfortable and was clearly signaling to her that, cut it out. And I was like, okay, let's see how we can push this. See if she gets it, because she was full on in her role of little Lolita or seductress or whatever she was whatever trip she was on. And I pulled up my wallet and I showed some bills and I pointed to the wallet and said, like, how many do you need? Making clearly a very rude suggestion about her behavior. She loved it. She kept going. And her girlfriend got even more upset. And this took maybe about a minute and a half tops. And then when we were stuck in traffic again, and the bus and my car stopped moving, I looked her straight in the eye and I just shook my head, and tried to, with non-verbally, made some gestures that was clearly pointing out, like, you're wrong, don't do this. This is really bad. She laughed it off. And then her girlfriend sitting next to her was quite relieved to see that I wasn't pushing this and that I actually was trying to make a point here. My point to you with this story is this. There's nothing wrong with what she did, in the sense that she was lucky, because I'm not at all interested in little teenage girls, but some sick, evil bastards are. And that kind of signaling that she did could be just what triggers that bastard to keep on driving behind that bus and following it eventually to the point where it's going to stop. And eventually they're going to have to get off. Sooner or later, they're going to have to get off that bus. And that bastard's going to be waiting for them, because he just got triggered by the signals that girl chose to send out. And if it's not right then and there, it could be that he follows her home or hangs back a little bit from a distance, see where she lives. And in his mind, lots and lots of dirty fantasies start developing that eventually lead to an attack. This is what I mean with sending out signals. Again, do whatever you like, but don't pretend that it cannot have negative consequences. Just be discerning who you do that kind of stuff with. So that's, again, I told you I was going to try to speak the truth, but that it was going to get a little bit dark. So on to tip number 4, learn to set boundaries. And that means standing up for yourself, which means don't do things you don't want to do. You need to be able to say no. I know all about hookup culture and how things are going nowadays, and it's none of my business what you do in your personal life and who you do it with and how often you do that. It's not what I'm talking about. My point is this: the more guys you get it on with, the odds go up that you eventually will come across an asshole who's going to push things too far or beyond the point that you want to go, or do things that you really don't want to do with him. My point is, try to spot those guys, because some of them will hide it quite well, and you might be further along the track of getting really frisky with the guy until you figure it out. So you need to learn to say no in a very clear and unambiguous way. And then we get to a sticky point, and that is the difference between being assertive and aggressive. Now, within this context, I will explain it as such. Being assertive means that you set boundaries and you defend them when people cross them. You're being attacked and you're defending yourself. Being aggressive means you might be setting boundaries, but you are crossing them to attack somebody else. You are the aggressor. You're the attacker. It's sometimes hard to distinguish between the two if you don't have much experience. I'm going to give you an example. And again, the direct link will be in the show notes. And before I forget, show notes are quite easy to figure out. You go to wimsblog.com/32, the number 3232, and then you will find all the links that I just mentioned. There was a blog post that I made many years ago, and the title is, if I'm not mistaken, how to make absolutely sure you get your ass kicked. What happened? A group of young people, I think late teens, early 20s. I think they were in France, Americans, and it was obviously a lot of partying going on. And you see this young woman with a glass in her hand, and we don't see what started the conflict, but we see how she reacts to it, and she's basically cussing out this guy. And just saying a bunch of stuff, why would you do that? And, get lost and this and that. And the guy starts backing off and walking away, and she does the same thing. All of a sudden, she goes right back at him and just gives him another piece of her mind. And that restarts the conflict. And then she throws her glass, the contents of her glass, in his face. And that's when the asshole walks up to her and leg kicks her, and she falls to the ground. And he kicks her pretty damn hard. And my point was this, is that she was winning. It was over. He was walking away, and it was over. And she did her utmost of reigniting that conflict. That is being aggressive. That's not being assertive. You won. He's backing off. Then don't push it. Now, I'm not making a moral judgment. You do whatever you want, but I'm just explaining the mechanics of how violence works and how you can avoid having your actions blow up in your face. Because if you don't have a lot of experience, it's actually quite difficult to manage correctly. So I would say, in general, learn to distinguish when your boundaries are broken by somebody else, and it's time for action. So when you say no, for whatever reason, and the guy pushes it, say no harder and louder. If he pushes it again, you leave. Because somebody with good intentions doesn't push it when a woman makes it clear that she doesn't want to do something. Bad guys push it. And when that happens, you need to know that it's time to get out of there. And if that doesn't work, you need to fight. But to be able to get to that point, you need to know where your boundaries are, and you need to set them and communicate them clearly so you can defend them. So that was tip number 4. Moving on to number 5, a critical one. Be aware of your surroundings. This is true for all levels of self-defense, and this is much of my advice is going to be just as valid for men, obviously. But I've noticed that very often women are not really into this kind of mindset. So when you go somewhere, notice who's there and what kind of vibe they give off. And it's like checking for cute guys, but in reverse. Just like you make a mental note for the guys that look hot and that you might be interested in, well, look for guys that give off a bad vibe. And you do that anyway. When you go out with your girlfriends and you check everybody out, when you notice there's some creep looking at one of your friends, you tell her. It's like, don't look now, but the guy on the right is totally giving you this really, really, really creepy vibe here. I don't like how he looks at you. Let's move, or something like that. You've been there. Well, apply the same thing to yourself. Apply the same logic to yourself and try to figure out who is actually looking at you in a way that doesn't forebode many good things. Now, you can look in mirrors and observe them without them noticing you, reflections. You can do a quick glance, pretend you're looking over at something else, and let your eyes just glance over him so you can see what's going on. You can use peripheral vision, many ways of doing that. But just be aware of who's around you and what vibe they give off. Now, just because somebody shows up on your radar doesn't mean that by definition they have bad intentions. But at the very least, you know that that's a guy you need to take note of. Another point of being aware of your surroundings is that notice always where you are and how can you get out of there. Where are the exits? Are there any secondary exits? How do you need to get there? Are they locked? Is that door open? And so on. Much of that information is very quickly available to you if you just pay attention. So you come into a place and then you formulate a plan. Imagine that something goes wrong. It doesn't have to be rape. It could be that fire breaks out, whatever, fight breaks out, whatever. Okay, where do you go if you have to leave in a hurry or escape from danger? And just staying outside isn't enough. Where's the door? which one do you use to get outside? And that way, if you do that right as you enter a place, you have a plan to work towards if something goes wrong. You don't have to overthink it. Just take a minute at tops just to figure everything out, and then you can stop worrying about it. But just make it a habit of being aware where you can go if something goes wrong and how do you get there. Because and then in the worst possible scenarios, you actually have already a plan in front of you that you can try to implement. Tip number 6, avoid dangerous situations. Once again, going to be controversial, but I'm going to give you a quote of Mark McYoung, and he said, "Not everyone has what it takes to fight off monsters, but everyone has the ability to not willingly walk into their lairs." And I think this is one of the best advice that you can get. In many ways you can take this, but for instance, don't meet up with people you hardly know. And in particular, don't go to their place. There's this typical scenario in which a girl or a young woman gets chatting with a guy over the internet or using Messenger or whatever, and eventually they decide to get together and they go to his place, or he might claim that it's a neutral place, but it actually turns out that it's a place of him or one of his friends. And she goes in there, the door closes, and then all of his other friends walk into the room, and she's trapped. And that's when the gang rape starts. And this is a scenario that's happened over and over and over again. So if you do go somewhere, you would tell somebody, your parents, obviously, friends, and so on, tell where you're going and who you're going with. I know you might not like that advice, but it's one of the best ways to keep yourself safe. And then, in a casual way, let the guy know that other people know where you are. And that in and of itself can actually solve many of the potential problems. Same thing, you go to a party, use the buddy system. If you meet this guy that you're really into and you just want to spend some solo time with him, not necessarily going all the way, but just, go off into a dark corner, so to speak. Well, tell a friend who isn't wasted, obviously, and tell them where you are going and ask them to check on you in about X amount of time. However long you want to make that, and obviously not in 5 days, but ask them to check back on you, and then you can, if you've got a little bit of experience, you can figure out a signal that you can make eye contact as you're still, talking with that guy or whatever, and just give her a thumbs up, so to speak, that she knows that you're fine, that she doesn't need to come help you get rid of what actually looked like a good guy but turned out to be a roaring asshole. So use the buddy system, and many young women use it already. I think it should be something that needs to be taught to consistently do. But use that. It helps you avoid a bunch of dangerous situations that way. And most of all, again, you might not enjoy this one, but don't get totally wasted so you no longer have any control over your actions. And it's the same advice I give young men. Don't just end up so drunk that you don't know what the hell you're doing. Good example of why it's not just rape and violence. It's just, there's this show on MTV that's been going on for a long time that I like a lot. It's called Ridiculousness, and it's just a load of examples of men and women doing stupid things in general, but in particular when they're drunk or stoned out of their minds. Yeah, you can look it up. It's quite funny, but it's always things that people then regret later. And when you watch it when you're sober, as the people in the audience and watching, and the hosts, I would assume are, then a lot of those videos they end up commenting on like, what the hell were you thinking? Where were you going with that? I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. This is so stupid. Well, if you're completely wasted, that part of your brain doesn't really work anymore. So overall, try to not get into situations that you can't get out of anymore. Tip number 7, if you can't avoid, escape. So if you want a guy to stop doing something, be clear and firm. No means no. Full stop. Like I said before, if his intentions are good, then he respects that. If not, you have to understand that you are in danger. You need to get out of there. Now, one of the ways you can get out of there is lie, make up an excuse, pretend you have to throw up, whatever. I mean, you can start making retching noises like, oh my God, I drank too much, I'm going to puke all over your shirt, blah, 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 whatever. You can lie and cheat to get out of a dangerous situation. It's allowed, it's fine. But get away, do get away. Second point of this is that once you do say no, don't say yes again. And this is when it gets tricky. Like I said in the beginning, it's not easy, this kind of stuff. It's not necessarily black and white. You might not necessarily be confronted with this psychopath. Might be a guy that actually, you kind of like, but you notice that he's drank a little bit too much. He's not fully wasted, but he's getting there. And, you like him, but you'd rather he be sober when you guys really get together. So you don't want to go all the way just yet, but you don't want to, push him away in a manner that means that he's never going to want to talk to you again. So it gets to be a little bit difficult sometimes. But that doesn't mean you should say yes when you don't want to, obviously. Which is what I said in the beginning, you need to know how to set boundaries. Point is that once you set a boundary, don't move it yourself. It's one thing if somebody tries to cross it. It's something if you pull that boundary back and let them come closer. So when you say no, don't say yes again. At the very least, not the same day. And if you can, leave. If you can't leave, get around other people so you're no longer alone with that guy. And the final point of that is that if you've been in a close call for whatever reason, and you know, like, okay, I'm very lucky to get away here. Okay, get out of there. Party's over. Leave. And I want you to make sure to pay attention for the next few days to spot that guy, that he can't surprise you. And also next few times that you're in some sort of social situation where he's likely to be. And obviously avoid being alone with him again or having him come close to you. This is the same advice I give young men when they've been in a fight. It's not over. It doesn't matter if you beat that guy up or he beats you up or you end up giving him a few punches and you get a few and then the fight is supposedly over because people break it up. He might be stewing over that for days and looking for a way to get back at you. Same thing applies to you, young women. When you end up saying no to a guy, he might be really brooding and just getting himself worked up over it and looking for a way to give you some payback. So be aware of that. Don't pretend nothing is going on when you had to just slap a guy's hands off of you, so to speak. So that's tip number 7. And now we get to the one in number 8 that everybody thinks about when I talk about self-defense, and that is fight. It's the reason why this is the next to last tip that I give, because it's in many ways the least important, but it's what most people want to hear about. So here's the thing. If you have to fight, you go full tilt. Don't hold back. You go all out. You do powerful, full-on attack if you have to go physical. But, and here's the thing, you do so with the goal of getting away from him. And here you see my previous point about knowing where exits are and having a plan up front, knowing how to get there. Because then you can work towards that goal and you don't stop until you achieve it. Now, if you don't know how to fight, okay, good, take some classes, take self-defense classes, pick up a martial art, doesn't matter. But it has to be with the goal of getting away from that guy. What you need to understand is that you are working from, in the vast majority of the cases, a physical disadvantage. Because on average, a man and a woman of equal size, weight, and age, and so on, typically the man is much stronger, physically speaking. It's pure biology. It has nothing to do with psychological aspect. It's just purely biological. They're stronger. And in a fight, the stronger man, the stronger person, in this case, very often wins. Strength is a huge factor. So the odds of you doing well physically fighting a guy, generally speaking, again, on average, they're lower. And that is why fighting is the last resort. And your goal is always to escape the guy, but not beat the guy or win or humiliate or whatever. It's getting away from that dangerous situation that you find yourself in. And you decide to take it physical and there's no other way but that. Okay, get out of there. And go through the guy, get to the door and get the hell out of there. And then a final one, and I'm not going to go too deeply into detail about this one. I'm just going to mention it. Because then we get to a really, really dark part of this topic, and that is, don't let yourself be taken to a secondary location. That's the last tip. My point is this. Statistically speaking, if you are taken to a secondary location, the odds of you dying there are incredibly, incredibly high. So don't let it get to that. Yes, there are exceptions, I know, but when you just look at the numbers, you will find that once you get dragged off somewhere, once you get dragged into a car and taken elsewhere, that's when the really bad things happen. The things that you're not going to make it out alive of. So that's when you go full tilt and you try to you're literally fighting for your life. Yes, I know, again, there are exceptions, but in general, if you need to get advice, in my opinion, about what to do when somebody tries to take you elsewhere, and then I would say, same thing to men, is fight for your life, because it's on the line. And that's it for this episode, and I'm going to give you a few more things in conclusion. There's a really good quote from Rory Miller that I like a lot for this kind of thing, and it's this. Rory said, "It's better to avoid than to run. It's better to run than to de-escalate. It's better to de-escalate than to fight, and it's better to fight than to die. The very essence of self-defense is a thin list of things that might get you out alive when you're already screwed." And I completely agree with that. If it gets to physical fighting, a lot of things have already gone wrong. And you're really in a bad scenario here, especially, again, like I said, women against men. No disrespect to some of the strong women out there, but on average, again, listen well, on average, you're at a physical disadvantage. So you really don't want to get into a physical fight if you can avoid it. Now, I also know that this is a lot of information. I don't expect you to get good at that all at once. So what I would suggest is focus on one thing at a time and just keep practicing. And in time, you're going to get better at it. So remember that if you've been driving a car for a few years, you know this. First time you get on the road, most people, they tend to freak out a little bit because there's so many things to pay attention to. It's too much at first. And it's hard to not make mistakes or do stupid things as you're driving. But after a few years, you've got the experience of doing so, and that's when the biggest danger sometimes is that stop being on your phone, stop driving on autopilot, and stop texting and chatting on your phone while you're in your car driving around. And that's the opposite of what you experienced when you first started driving, is that you're so used to handling all these different parameters that keep on changing around you that you think you've got the brain capacity for texting and chatting and so on. So think of the self-defense tips that I gave you in the same manner. If you do them bit by bit, then it's going to take a little time, but you will get better at it. It's not rocket science. Also, none of this is black or white, and none of this is easy. And welcome to adult life. That's how it is. Very often there is no easy solution. And the worst part about self-defense in general, but in particular for women, is that there's no way to know for sure if you're doing the right thing. There are no guarantees. You can do everything right and you still end up in a horribly bad place. There are always consequences to your choices. And very often they suck. And you have to do things you'd rather not. On the other hand, I want to give you a message of hope and something more positive. And it's the following. Nobody, I repeat, nobody will take care of you more than you can. And nobody will be more invested in your safety than you. Nobody will be able to make you into a strong, confident person who has agency when it comes to your own life than you. Now, if you turn yourself into such a person, you won't only increase your chances of avoiding rape and other types of violence, but you increase your chances of having a successful life. A life that's worth living. A life that is safe. As much as you can possibly make it. And with that, I want to wish you the best of luck with that. And I hope that this episode of the podcast gave you a little bit of, practical information and some things to try out to help you lead that life. And I am going to wrap it up here. So, quickly before I go, thank you for listening. If you want to see all the links to the stuff that I talked about, go to wimsblog.com/3232, so the number, and that will take you to a page with all things that I said that I would give you links about. If you want to help out the podcast, like, share, subscribe, and so on, let people know. Share this far and wide with women that you think might find this useful. If you want to do something more, you can always support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/Wim Demeere. See what we've got over there. And that's pretty much it for me, you guys. I hope you find this one useful. Like I said, next episode is going to come out soon, hopefully. It's going to be with Ian Abernethy. I think that's going to be a really useful and fun episode because Ian and I had a lot of fun discussing all the topics that we covered. Anyway, that's it. Over and out from me. Thank you guys, and talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Wim Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.